It is a beautiful Thursday morning in the French Quarter, and right now we're on our way to breakfast, but today we're going to see some places such as the old Ursuline Convent, as well as possibly the Gallier House, and many, many other things like French Market. So there's a big variety of things we're going to see today, but for now we'll enjoy a walk over to the breakfast restaurant.
Day 4 of our New Orleans trip was chocked full of things that we were going to see, but it was all going to end with a walk around of the Garden District, which is one of the other more famous neighborhoods in the city of New Orleans, but we'll get to that later. One of my favorite things to do in New Orleans actually was to walk around the French Quarter early in the morning, and so as we were on our way to this breakfast place that we had selected, it was really, really nice to hear the birds chirping and to feel the morning breeze and just walk around a peaceful French Quarter. It's just a beautiful little town within a city. The place we had selected for breakfast that morning was a little diner right on the corner of Dumaine and Dauphine Streets, and it was called the Waken Bacon. The food and coffee were really good. The first museum of the day was a place called the Gallier House, which is located on Royal Street, and it's actually kind of a famous little place because it's used in various TV shows and movies. Most recently, it was used in the TV show Interview with the Vampire as the home of the vampire Lestat de Liancourt. And actually, in the books written by Anne Rice, it also served as Lestat's house in the books. The price of a 45-minute tour of the house was $17 per person, and whether or not you're willing to pay that all depends on if you like old architecture and old furnishings and old houses. That could really depend on what you think of this place. The Gallier House was the home of a locally renowned architect who built a large portion of the beautiful structures in the French Quarter and the Garden District. The museum told a brief story of his career and his immediate family, but the museum had seasonal focuses. Since we had visited in October, the focus was on funerals and how grief was processed in New Orleans in the mid-1800s. It was actually a really interesting exhibit, and you got to see a lot of various architectural features. Some of it were replicated, some of it were original. For instance, they had peeled away a lot of layers of paint that were added over the years to the baseboards to reveal some of the original marble that was in the room and replicated that marble for other features of the house where the same exact marble would have been. So it was actually very, very interesting, and the whole place was furnished with replica furniture of the exact same age of the decorations that would have been in the house, all the different furnishings and things. There was a lot to learn about the grief process and how things worked that way. In fact, I probably couldn't even explain to you all the things that we had learned in that house about that. Now, we were able to ask our tour guide individual questions, and of course my brain always leaned towards the architectural features of the home, but it was really interesting because it's a lot like a very small mansion. There was plenty of rooms, and the ceilings were high, everything was decorated so luxuriously. But also, just like the plantations upriver, this house had a dark side, and that was evident with the multiple slaves' quarters they had out back. Most of the large and beautiful luxurious houses in the French Quarter do have a slave's quarters somewhere or a servant's quarters somewhere on property, and in this case there was a row of it right out back near the courtyard. So this house does have a lot to offer in terms of what you can learn, and especially about the architect who built it, and as well as the family that lived with him, and even about the slaves themselves. We learned about how one slave, a young woman, had children, and there was no paperwork as to what happened to those children, so they're not really sure if the children had died or if they were sold. So there's just a lot of interesting stories to this place, and it was really a pleasure to walk through it and learn about it, especially learning about how people lived in those times, not just the rich people, but also the servants and the slaves. So I definitely do recommend a visit to the Gallier House. The next museum we visited was the Ursuline Convent, and I do have a video about that. It looks a bit creepy, but I swear it's a very interesting story about how it came to be. But essentially, just off the top of my head, the Ursulines were nuns that came from France. They were sent over to help establish the city of New Orleans and help try to make the ungodly bunch of men that established the city into a more godly bunch, essentially. And after a while, they had built a convent that was just down the street. And unfortunately, it was built of materials that just didn't last in the climate of New Orleans. And so this building had to be made right afterwards. And I believe it was completed in the 1750s. I want to say 1758, right off the top of my head. And despite the fact that it was completed about 30 years after the Ursulines originally came to New Orleans, it is still considered the oldest French colonial architecture in the entire Mississippi River Valley. So it's actually really interesting that way, and it's one of the most well-built buildings in the French Quarter. Now, you can go inside the Ursuline Convent for about $8 per person, which is actually a really good price. There's no official tour. I think you can pay a tour guide, I think, but I didn't see that on the list that day. So we just walked in, paid $8, and we were able to just walk around the ground level of the whole building, which had various exhibits, as well as being able to see some of the larger rooms, such as the cafeteria that the nuns would eat in, and you could walk into the chapel where services to this day are still held on special occasion. So it was just a really beautiful place. The architecture was just amazing. They have this grand staircase that you actually can't walk on, and in fact, it looks very solid, but when you really look closer, it has its fragility that you might notice. But I would say the chapel itself was just beautiful and grand. That was probably one of the most beautiful chapels I'd ever been in. I've never been in anything more beautiful than that so far. So that was a very fun and interesting place to stop, and that's another place I would recommend. And they have a cool little gift shop where you can buy gifts and things that commemorate your visit to the Ursuline Convent. So definitely check it out, and check out my video about the history of it. After the convent, we walked around the Marigny. The Marigny is the first neighborhood to spring up right outside the French Quarter. Now, keep in mind that the Garden District was part of the city of Lafayette back then, not New Orleans. So technically, the first neighborhood to spring up from the city of New Orleans, right outside the French Quarter, was the Marigny, which was sold by the plantation owner with the last name Marigny. And it was developed, and it became kind of a neighborhood for at the time, I guess you would call them the lower class, the middle class, or something like that, but then it quickly became more gentrified. Even though the Marigny is literally right across the street from the French Quarter, it is a different neighborhood in and of itself. It's very brightly colored in comparison to the French Quarter, and it has its own kind of culture to it. Frenchman Street is the lively center of the Marigny, and the clubs come alive with jazz, zydeco music, and other New Orleans favorites. So it's really a place that I would say it's half and half, where locals and visitors would come to experience the nightclubs with all the music. And if I have my history correctly, the Marigny neighborhood was the birthplace of jazz.
So now we're crossing the street back into the French Quarter, and right here on the street corner is the old U.S. Mint. So this is the oldest U.S. Mint in the United States, and it's the only one to have ever printed both Union and Confederate coins, and they imprinted them at very close periods of time.
The U.S. Mint is now used as a jazz museum. So you can go in there and learn all about the jazz greats and all of the most amazing jazz hits and how the culture of jazz had started and spread throughout the world. So it's really, really interesting. And I hear they saved a few of the coin minting machines that are on display. It's not much because a lot of it was removed when the minting operations had ceased, but it's still a cool little tidbit nonetheless.
Have we been this far in the French Quarter? We have post-war France. Yeah. Like a painter or where are we heading to now, Alex?
Afterwards, we walked around the French market, and this place kind of gets the reputation of being like a touristy marketplace, but there is a significant historical story behind the French market in the fact that before there ever was a New Orleans, before there ever was a French Quarter, the French market is the original location of what the local natives called Bolbancha, or the place of many tongues. This was where natives from all across the region would come to sell their wares. They would set up a little marketplace and sell the various foods and things that they made. And so when it was up to Jean-Baptiste Lemoyne de Bienville to establish a place where the city of New Orleans would be, he saw this area of high ground naturally created by the deposit of silt and dirt and soil from the Mississippi River, and it was higher off the river by just a few feet, but nevertheless it was the perfect place to set up a small town because it was very close to the mouth of the Mississippi River where trade could be done using ships. And so anyway, the French market dates all the way back to before the 1700s and the establishment of New Orleans. It dates back hundreds of years. But even then, it is the oldest place, the oldest part of the settlement of the city of New Orleans.
All right, we're heading towards St. Louis Cathedral now, so we're going to go inside and check it out real quick. Then we'll be back out here to go into the Presbytere and see the museums they got inside. Then we're also going to go to the Garden District after that. So we still have a lot to do today. Oh, man.
The next thing we did was go to the museum inside the Presbytere, which is the building on the right-hand side of the cathedral. They didn't allow filming, though they did allow pictures, but I didn't take any pictures because, you see, the museum, and I have to choose my words carefully because YouTube creates this whole conundrum over what words you use, but the museum was about the famous storm that hit New Orleans. And out of respect for the museum and just the exhibit in general, I didn't take photographs of it. It's one of those things where you should see it yourself or experience it yourself to really take in the message. The admission for that museum was just $7, so that was definitely well worth it. And afterwards, it was time for us to hop on an original streetcar and go down St. Charles Street to the Garden District for a walk around.
We're on the St. Charles streetcar on our way to the Garden District. Okay, let's go. Let's go. How'd you get out?
That door is really hard to open.
Really?
We stopped in at a cafe called District, and we got some fancy donuts and some coffee. Unfortunately, the original audio clip has a lot of copyrighted music in it, so I have to narrate over it. But essentially, we got a pumpkin spice latte donut, as well as a type of cinnamon roll that they had, which looked really delicious. Both were very good, as well as the coffee. So if you find yourself walking around the Garden District, then I highly recommend stopping in at the cafe called District. After that, we went for a walk around the Garden District, which is one of the older neighborhoods in the city of New Orleans. Like I said earlier, it originally was part of the city of Lafayette, which was later sold to the city of New Orleans. And this was where all the sugar barons and the cotton kings lived. This is like the neighborhoods of mansions where all the wealthiest, most powerful people in New Orleans would live. And it still kind of is today, technically, as well as a place where celebrities live as well. So the Garden District is a highly sought-after district, and you can see why. It is very beautiful, and there is a lot of architecture here. And so it's actually become quite a fun place for visitors to just walk around and enjoy the architecture and take pictures and stuff. I did a live stream simultaneously while filming using my other camera for this vlog, so enjoy.
Yes, Chris has been replaced with Shiloh.
I'm the cookie guy, apparently.
He's the cookie guy.
Oh, look at this.
I asked Chris to take a photo thumbnail for this live stream, and he failed. So
I failed because he was like, take a picture. I'm like, okay. And he was like, take a picture of this. I'm like, okay. You didn't listen to him.
they remind you, this is a guy who's worked on YouTube years before me.
Because I had communication, upper communication, unlike some people here.
Yep.
No, you don't mind communication.
Look at how warped the sidewalk is. Like they're going up and down over the roots of the trees. Oh, this is one of the houses that inspired the Haunted Mansion.
I was gonna say it looks
Yeah, so this is one of the houses that inspired the Haunted Mansion at Disneyland. Although there is one more house that no longer exists that served as the main inspiration. And off the top of my head, I do not remember what it was, but it's in Missouri, or was in Missouri. So yeah, pretty cool. I probably look ridiculous with this this camera mount holding multiple cameras. Oh, wow. So this building is being renovated, but look how beautiful. Jeez.
that looks like it though.
It does look like it's because of the Greek Corinthian columns.
Yeah.
There's like the second time we've seen a doodle guarding a house. Beautiful house though. And what's really great is that, whoa, look at that house. Wow. Jeez. Beautiful.
After the Garden District, my feet were killing me, and we were all sore and so exhausted that I actually didn't film an outro for this vlog. So this will be the outro to the vlog. And I will just say it was a really, really fun day, but man, we were all exhausted afterwards. We went straight to the hotel and collapsed. So anyway, folks, if you enjoyed this vlog, give it a like, comment, subscribe for more content. We still have another vlog coming with the final full day in New Orleans and part of the last day in New Orleans. So stick around for that, and I'll see you all next time. Bye-bye.